Hi. On today's episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast, I'll be talking about sleight of mouth, which is a topic I've talked about before. And I don't know if you're tired of hearing about it or not, but there's new stuff. You remember a couple podcasts ago, or a few podcasts ago, we had Robert Dilts here talking about his new book, Sleight of Mouth II. Between then and now, I have taken his course on Sleight of Mouth II, and it was really interesting. And I've got lots to talk about because I have a course coming up really soon, and it's going to have to change a little bit. So I want to tell you about that. So this is going to be fun. Stay tuned. Here we go. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important. So welcome back. Sleight of mouth is something, as I've mentioned before, I've talked a lot about before. Interestingly, sort of interestingly, I've been doing NLP and hypnosis and things for a long time. I got started back in 1985 when I first took a firewalk experience thing with Tony Robbins. And Tony was teaching NLP at the time. His introduction to NLP was the firewalk. Hey, look what you can do with NLP. You can even walk across hot burning coals. It was an intro to NLP. The firewalk experience was an intro to NLP. Then he taught a weekend kind of intensive introduction to NLP called the Mind Revolution. It later became the Unlimited Power Weekend after he wrote a book by that name. But the first seminar I ever taught was after becoming certified in NLP from Tony. I went and got master practitioner training from Robert Dilts and his partner at the time, Todd Epstein. Part of the reason I went there is because I wanted to learn sleight of mouth. There'd been an introduction to it by Tad James and Wyatt Woodsmall at one of Tony's trainings, and it just seemed so amazing. I had a friend who went out there and did it and came back very, very noticeable change in her skill levels. So I wanted that too. So I went out and studied with Dilts. So when I came back from studying with Dilts, because I had sort of gotten to the point where I was a trainer for Tony Robbins' organization at that point, when I came back to New York, people were going like, tell us about it. What was sleight of mouth? And so I taught my first seminar to a bunch of Tony Robbins trainers in New York City. 87, maybe 1987, 1988, perhaps. But right around that time of year. So I started teaching seminars in sleight of mouth before I did anything else. As far as teaching, I was still a musician and, basically doing that for a living back then. So this was my first foray into teaching seminars, which I do a lot these days. It's kind of what I do at this point. But one of the first things I ever did was teach a seminar that used a workbook that looked a lot like this one. This is my office copy. You can see it's pretty well marked up, but a little notebook that had all the stuff that I learned from Robert. I call them now the classic examples from Robert Dilts and Todd Epstein. It's labeled as such here in the book. They were a very interesting partner. I'll talk more about them in a bit. Later on, I wrote this book because the way that Robert Dilts taught sleight of mouth and Todd Epstein taught sleight of mouth back in those days was using this chart. I don't know if you're listening to this auditorily, you won't know what chart I'm referring to, but there's this mind map, if you will, this icon representational chart that is a really great visual aid for keeping track of all the different sleight of mouth patterns. If you've seen it, then you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, well, sorry. You'll have to check out the YouTube channel to see what I'm talking about. But when Robert Dilts' first book, Sleight of Mouth, came out in, 1990 something, 94. I don't actually know. I was surprised. I was kind of shocked, actually, that he didn't have any of those charts in there. It was a fascinating book, but talking about the concepts behind it and things like that. Very interesting. But that's the reason, that is literally the reason I wrote this book, The User's Guide to Sleight of Mouth, which has those charts in it, and examples of how to use the, utilizing the charts. They're a lot smaller in this book, but you can copy them, blow them up. But basically teaching the same way that I was taught in 87. I elaborated on it. I made some of the things my own. I had opinions about stuff. I said the chunking up pattern wasn't really chunking up. It was more like an exaggeration, or, if you want to compare it to chunking down, you can call it blowing up. But chunking up wasn't really quite accurate. And I'll stick to that, by the way. Just thank you very much. When it came to how I was taught it in 1987 by Todd and Robert. Todd Epstein, Robert's partner at the time. Todd, unfortunately, passed away a number of years ago. But the way they taught it, it was an exaggeration. It may have had elements of chunking up in it. Maybe that's the way Robert was thinking about it. But the way it came out, and all of the examples were where you exaggerate it to the nth degree, not necessarily just simply chunking up. So I was fascinated by the discussion that Robert and I had in previous podcasts that you've heard or haven't heard, but they're there. And I was fascinated to take this course and read Robert's new book, Sleight of Mouth II, which, by the way, has a lot of illustrations in it. It does have quite a few illustrations in it about how to use the different patterns, and the maps are all in here. It's really quite colorful and well done. In fact, he's got a lot of illustrations in it. It's back in the back of the book that the illustrator is credited with this equal size about the author thing as Robert has. So it's a lot of illustrations. It's really, really well done, really, really well thought out, and a new light to me on the whole thing about Sleight of Mouth. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that today. Really fascinating stuff. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. And also, this is a little bit self-serving on my part, because I do have a Sleight of Mouth course coming up very soon. I don't know when you're going to listen to this podcast. Maybe it's last year that I taught the course by the time you listen to this podcast. I don't know. But it's coming up soon from the day I'm recording this. It's in a couple of weeks. It's going to be a 4-month training cohort practice group mix, where I'll be teaching the Sleight of Mouth stuff, but I'm also going to be giving opportunities for you to practice and give assignments and get out in practice groups. And over time, 4 months, 16 meetings, you'll have a lot of time to let it integrate into your body. So I want to tell you about that. It's part of the reason for my doing this. Full disclosure. Also wanted to just say that part of my reason for doing that is, practice. As you can tell from the background, I'm a piano player. I've been doing that for a long, long time. And I got to that point because of practicing. It's all about practicing. I got good at Sleight of Mouth because I practiced it. I made a point of filling out those charts. It was like a crossword puzzle for me. I would Xerox copy, showing my age there a little bit, Xerox copy one of those blank charts. And I'd think of a belief that, I have, or somebody else have, or that I come up against in my piano teaching or my marketing or whatever else, that an objection, a belief that somebody else would have, I can't do it because of this. And I would write a whole chart up about that. So I'd practice doing it, but I'd also have something to say next time that belief was said to me in real life. When a person said, I can't do it because of this, I'd be like, well, isn't it more important to, and I'd launch into some of the Sleight of Mouth things that I'd practiced. Practice is how you get good at something. It just is. I've recently, nearing completion on a new book, switching gears ever so slightly, called The User's Guide to Storytelling. User's Guide to Sleight of Mouth. You might have noticed the little thing. So the User's Guide to Storytelling, again, has lots of illustrations in it. This is a galley copy, so it's not ready for publication yet. We're still correcting certain things. But User's Guide to Storytelling is about how to become a good storyteller. Some people are naturally gifted at, name it, they're naturally gifted whatevers, right? But it doesn't mean that they can just stick with their natural gifts and become great at anything. Naturally gifted pianists still practice a lot. Naturally gifted singers still practice a lot. They do. They practice a lot. Tony Robbins is a naturally gifted debater and presenter, public speaker. He is naturally gifted at that. But he'll tell the story about how he got so good at sales is because he went out and did it. His story is that other people would say, "Oh, every time I go out, it takes me at least 10 meetings to get a single yes." And he said, "Great. So I'll go out and I'll get as many no's as possible because every 10 no's I get a yes. So I'll just keep doing it." So he did hundreds of presentations instead of dozens of presentations. And so that's how he got so good at it, says Tony. And I believe that's true. So any naturally gift that you have can be enhanced with practice and needs to be. The story I tell about piano playing is I remember when I was doing my senior recital in college, and my piano teacher very wisely suggested that I do the concert informally for a collected group of people like back at home. So I put on a little concert in my mom's living room, and she brought her bridge club over, and these ladies from her youth, her sorority sisters from college and stuff. So they're all assembled, and I played this recital, and they were impressed because I played well. And this one lady came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh my gosh, that was so beautiful. I would give anything to play like that." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yes. Oh, yes. I would give anything to play like that." I said, "Well, okay. Well, here's what you do. First, get a good piano, and then get a good piano teacher, and then take lessons from them and do everything they say, and practice like 3 to 4 hours a day for 8 years, and you'll be able to play just like me," because that's what I did. Which isn't quite true. I didn't start off practicing 3 or 4 hours a day. I worked up to that. You start small, right? When you're a kid, 5 minutes, great. But the more you practice, the better you get. There is a direct correlation. In fact, there is a direct correlation. You probably know this, but let me just tell you anyway, in case you don't. They did a study. That's how they know. They did a study of like 500 piano players from childhood. I mean, it wasn't that long of a study. Took a year, maybe 2. But so they took beginning children piano players, and they measured how good they were, and then they measured how good they were after a year. And each of those students kept track of how much they practiced. And at the end of the year or 2 years, whatever the study duration was, they assessed the students. And guess what? There is a direct 1-to-1 correlation between how much they practiced and how good they were. There was no deviation, 0 deviation for talent. Nothing. The best ones practice the most, full stop. Now, does that mean there's no ever going to be exceptions? Of course there are exceptions to that. Of course there are exceptions to that. Stevie Wonder was performing and writing songs and singing amazingly when he was a child. There are exceptions, obviously. There are child prodigies. Those types of things happen. But for the rest of us, direct 1-to-1 correlation, how good you get. So that's why I'm teaching the way that I teach, just by the way. And I want to talk to you more about Robert Dilts, because this was so interesting to me. The way that he presented the sleight of mouth patterns this time was different. Previously, to me, it sounded like previously on NCIS, like a TV ad. But previously, when I learned it from Robert and Todd back in 1987, the way that they taught it, let's see here, got some notes just stuck in there. The way that they taught it is they took all the patterns, and you put the belief in the center, and then they started in the upper right-hand corner, the hierarchy criteria, and just simply went around the circle. So they just did a loop like that. And so there was no hierarchy for which ones go first, which is the first sleight of mouth reframe to use. There was no hierarchy for that. It was whatever you felt like, basically. And I still think that's true for the most part. Things will pop up in your brain when you know the different patterns. Things it's like, well, oh, that's a really easy, you know, consequence pattern, or that's a really easy intent pattern, or I can make a great metaphor for that. You can do a lot of patterns that just sort of pop up depending on what the person's belief is and how they said it. They will just pop up for you like that. But what's also interesting is this. The way Robert taught it this time did not start with hierarchy of criteria and go around in a circle randomly, just, sort of in order. He chose 3 specific patterns to do on the first day. He did 4 specific patterns to do on the second day. It was a 4-day training. So each day he did, another number of patterns. He did, I think, 3 on the third day and 4 again on the 4th day, which made all 14 patterns representative there. But interestingly to me, he started with the intent pattern and went to a redefined pattern and then to a consequence pattern. And he taught that as a sequence. And then he taught a process. He had us all get up and we did this coach state anchor. So a coach state, just so you know, if you don't know, is what Robert Dilts and his partner, Stephen Gilligan, I believe they came up with this together. Maybe Robert did it independently. I'm not sure. But I know Stephen Gilligan talks about it a great deal as well. The coach state is a state where you are centered. That's what the C stands for. Open. So A is attentive. C is connected with your own stuff and others as well. And then H is for holding or hospitable. Stephen Gilligan often will say when a negative state comes in, you go like, welcome. You're hospitable to whatever is happening. You let it be and you sort with it. It's the Aikido thing. You accept the energy and then transform it. So we'd first get into this coach state. And then he also said this, which was fascinating to me, and I think really, really wise and important, is that you allow your brain and body to become connected. That's part of what the coach state is, to be able to, what he said, retrieve multiple intelligences. So Sleight of Mouth is removed from just being simply a cerebral exercise where you're just kind of like, getting really clever with your languaging and it's all kind of a head thing. And it gets more connected to the heart and to the gut. I think it was really smart because, beliefs are not just something we think about. Beliefs are something we viscerally experience, right? When you have a belief about something that you really believe, you can get mad when somebody else violates that or runs in the face of it or something like that. It's just a feeling that you get. It's a gut feeling. And there's evidence for this as a reality. That science has shown that we have just as many nerve endings around our gut as we have in our brain practically. Probably not, but close. It's a lot. It's like a second brain that we have. And we all know how heartfelt emotions are, right? We feel them in our hearts. And so it's kind of like the brain is, I think he put it very interestingly in the book. I haven't, full disclosure, read much of the book yet. I've flipped through it a bunch of times, get a feel for it. I've started reading it from the beginning, but I haven't gotten far, as you can see from my bookmark here. So I can't say for sure, certain all the things that's in here because I don't know for sure. But he did say in here, that, and I found this to be really quite interesting, I hadn't thought of it this way, is that how did he put it? Our distance senses are all in our head, right? So our eyes are in our head. We can see distance. I can see out there. I can see over there. I can see a distance. My senses for like there's the predator. I better run this way. I can see these distance things through my head. I can hear these ears that are in my head. I can smell the smells that are, there's fire over there. I better go this way. I can smell these distance things from my head. But my gut is like instincts. It's a gut feeling, right? And our tactile senses are not our head senses, our body senses. They are our body senses, how we feel about things. Our heart is somewhere in between there, right? Heart is between the gut and the head. It's the heart. So it's how we connect the two, if you will, and how we connect with others is with the heart. I thought it was really interesting. So that the way that he approached sleight of mouth was not just thinking about the structures of the belief and reframing them verbally, but like, how does it feel and what's your gut tell you? And connecting with what he called these multiple intelligences. Really smart stuff, really good stuff. I'm not slightly surprised because Dilts is so brilliant, but I was impressed. I was very much impressed. So we would start, we'd start by, standing up. I'm standing up now because it's the way I do this here, but Dilts is great about getting people to stand up to do various exercises, even when he's doing therapies with people. I've taken this to heart as well. I do this with people in my office. I'll get them up, move them around, stand over here, because it's interesting. The neuro part of the neuro-linguistic programming, sometimes we think it's just the brain, just the thoughts, the activities, the beliefs we have. But your neurology extends throughout your whole body, right? So when your physiology changes, and everybody knows this at this point, right? That when your physiology changes, your emotions change. So if you stand over here next to this wall thing, it's different than standing over in free space. We have different feelings. This is the past moving towards the future, right? We have this sensation about that in our bodies that informs these different connections. So I really, really appreciated how Dilts was taking these sleight of mouth patterns, but making it more whole-bodied and embodied in our senses. So when I teach sleight of mouth, I teach something that Robert doesn't teach, which is a precursor, if you will, to sleight of mouth, which I call the agreement frame. The agreement frame is something I learned from Tony Robbins. When somebody says, I think this, you go like, oh, wow, yeah, I can see that. I appreciate that, or I respect that, or I agree with that. You align with what they're saying. I agree. And you use the word and instead of but. So instead of butting up against their beliefs, you align with it. It's the Aikido thing. So then you can welcome it and redirect it. So I agree and I respect what you're saying, and you might look at it from this perspective. So I was very impressed when Robert said, the first sleight of mouth pattern we're going to do is the intent pattern, because the intent pattern aligns with the agreement frame. I see your intent. I appreciate your intent. I respect your intent. I agree with your intent. And let's move it over here. What you're doing isn't aligning with it at all. So let's do something different. So when he started with the intent pattern and then went to a redefine followed by a consequence, he then got a volunteer and led them through a process where he was, having this felt space and time, moving through time, finding a desired outcome. What is stopping them from getting there? Because, of course, if a client comes into your office and they can get their desired outcome without your help, they are just delivering something in your office. They're not there for your help. They're delivering lunch or something. The reason they're in your office is they have a desired state or desired outcome that they're not getting to, right? Something's stopping them. So Dilts was like, well, what is that feeling? You got to feel for where that is, your desired state. You're here now. That's your desired state. Take a step towards it. And then what comes up? What feelings come up? Like, why can't you do that yourself? What's stopping you? You elicit the belief that they have. And then you can use the intent pattern followed by a redefine, followed by a consequence to help eliminate or transform or reframe that belief so they can create a bridge or a pathway towards getting to their desired state. He did that with every day in the training. It's fascinating to me. The next day, he taught 4 different patterns and taught a different process to do with it. I believe it was called the belief bridge on the second day, where it's kind of like the integration of parts process, where on one hand, I have this belief, on the other hand, I have that belief, and there's this part of me wants this and a part of me wants that, but they're just in the way with each other. They're not working out well. So he said, well, let's integrate this part. So in a way, it's kind of like finding a way of doing a sleight of mouth bridge to a higher, higher level belief that can incorporate both of them? How do we bridge over that gap between these two parts? Brilliant work. Really, truly wonderful, wonderful work. So I don't really know what to say next, because he's not offering this class again. I don't know when he will. So I can't say, go take that course from Robert Dilts. I'm not sure exactly how that would work, if the recordings are available. It's not my department. I don't have any connection with that at all. It's totally Robert Dilts and totally the people that put that on. It was interesting because it was put on in France. I don't know if some of you guys went, but or attended, either virtually or not, but it was French time. They started it late morning for France, but it was still 5 a.m. for me. So I got up and had it on, but I didn't have my camera on because I was not ready for prime time. I did make an effort to be more camera ready on the second weekend. But fascinating stuff. Truly, truly great. And if you find a way to do that, I highly recommend it. And of course, his book is obviously available. So this is not a galley copy. This is a copy I got from Amazon or wherever I ordered this one from. I'm sure if you go to robertdilts.com, you can get hold of his new book. Really well done, really good stuff. And I invite you to explore that even more deeply. So one of the things I think is also kind of interesting about my experience from learning Sleight of Mouth from Robert Dilts in 1987, when his partner was alive and working with him, Todd Epstein, is that sometimes people would ask a question. As an example, I asked a question because it was a class, and it was a relatively small class. There were 2 teachers and 24 people, or however big it was. And so we'd ask questions and they'd answer them. But interestingly, they had this way of approaching the answers that was fascinating to me. They would sometimes, not in every case, not every question, every answer, but sometimes if it was a kind of deep question, they do something like this. Todd would get up and he'd say, well, that is a very interesting question. And then he would spatially move to one side of the room and say, the way I think about it is this. I think this is exactly the way it should be, and this is what you should do from this point forward, ever in the future, exactly like this. And then Robert would get up and say, well, Todd, that is a really wise thing to say, and yet I'm thinking it more like this. And then he would spatially move to another side of the room and talk about how it should be like this, and this is the way that you should do it from now on in all perpetuity, and have a direct, like, opposites thing. And then they wouldn't solve it. They wouldn't say, oh yeah, well, you're right. Oh, okay, no, I see your point, you're right. They just leave it out there. There's just be one way out here, one way out there, and we would be like, whoa, what's the answer? And it let us discover it for ourselves. Because I think what's really important is that when a teacher teaches something like an instrument or singing or storytelling, public speaking, that you don't just become a clone. There's not just a bunch of Tony Robbins out there talking just like Tony. Even if you try to, it's not going to come out the same way. Although I did know a guy who could do a pretty good Tony Robbins imitation. He's one of the trainers back in the day, could do a pretty killer Tony Robbins imitation. But that aside, he didn't do that when he was doing his own trainings. He was himself. I am myself. Dilts is himself. People become themselves. Different piano players have different way of expressing themselves through the music. Different guitarists, different singers. They're all different. They might take from the same teacher, but come out really, really different. So what was cool about the Robert Dilts and Todd Epstein thing is where, Todd walked over here and said, this is the right way to do it. This is the correct answer. And Robert's like, well, this is the right way. This is the correct answer. And then just leaving it that way is that we got to say, well, what do we think? How are we going to play this out? And part of the reason I'm telling you that is because although I have gone through Robert Dilts' training recently, and I'm reading his book, and I was moved by it, and I've watched the videos from the training at least once. I think I'm missing one day. I haven't repeated the day 4 yet. I'm trying to really get it, but I'm not going to be teaching that. This is not my stuff. This is Dilts' stuff. If you come to the class having done this already, if you were in that class with Dilts, I will refer to it. We can, have breakout rooms with strictly for the people who are doing this, but I'm not going to be doing it myself directly in the class. So I just want to make that clear. I also want to invite you, if you are listening to this in real time, prior to Tuesday, March 5th, 2024, I will be doing a free webinar for 90 minutes about sleight of mouth and about the agreement frame and other things that are involved. How do we elicit the complete belief, which is, by the way, something Robert didn't do in this new book, which I thought was kind of curious. But he has a different way of illustrating and made a really good diagram for the belief structure as he has it now. I learned the 3-part belief structure that I teach from Robert back in the day, and I've been teaching it ever since. And I found really good questions to help to elicit that, and we'll be talking about that in the webinar. So the webinar is at 1 o'clock Eastern for free, 1 o'clock Eastern until 2:30 Eastern on Tuesday, March 5th. So there'll be a link down in the comments if you want to get there. And just one more thing, by the way, I really appreciate you being here. Appreciate you coming to all these different podcasts that I've offered over the years. If you get a chance to just click down below and subscribe, or wherever that subscribe business button is, I think it's usually down below somewhere. Subscribe or hit like or do something like that. It really helps me more than, and you can, I can fully express. It really helps a lot when you do that, and I really appreciate that. As you notice, there are no commercials here. I don't put in the good word for American greens or anything like that. So it's commercial free. So, but if you just go ahead and subscribe, I don't think it'll cost you too much to do that. Appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope to really be seeing you soon. I apologize, I haven't been on the air. I went down, just so you know, speaking of storytelling, I went down to tell a story in New York City last week for a moth competition, a story slam competition, and I won. It's the first time I've won. I've done, this is probably my 5th, maybe 6th time attempting to win by telling a story there, but I literally came in first place. Look, there's my certificate, proves it. Yep. Which means to say I'm going to be moving on to a grand slam competition where all the winners of 10 different story slams compete in a grand slam, they call it. So I'll be competing against other winners sometime in the future. And it's also possible that they might take that story and broadcast it someday on NPR's The Moth Radio Hour. They have the right to do that, but they usually reserve the Moth Radio Hour for the winners of the Grand Slams. So, yeah, who knows? Maybe they'll like it. They can do what they want. But yeah, very exciting stuff. So that's where I've been. I've been paying a little bit more attention to trying to get the book done and doing that thing. And so I haven't been focusing on the podcast as much. So I apologize for my recent absence from the podcast airwaves, as it were. But we're back now, and I appreciate you being here. Thanks. See you again. This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.